The neon sign of the Stellar Stop Diner cut through the perpetual mist that surrounded New Portland's spaceport district, its blue-white glow reflecting off the puddles that dotted the cracked pavement below. Rachel wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night, her movements mechanical after 8 years of the same routine. The ancient coffee maker gurgled in the background, a sound as familiar as her own heartbeat. It was nearly midnight, that dead zone between the dinner rush and the early morning crowd of cargo workers and pilots looking for a cheap meal before their shifts. Rachel liked these quiet hours, when the diner felt suspended between worlds, much like the spaceport itself. Not quite Earth, not quite space, but something in between. The bell above the door chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up, the practiced smile already forming on her lips, but it froze when she saw them. 3 figures stood in the doorway, their silhouettes strange and angular against the neon-lit fog outside. As they stepped into the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. They were aliens, but not like the usual traders or diplomats who occasionally stopped by. These were young, adolescents by any species standards, and they looked terrified. The tallest one had skin like burnished copper, with delicate patterns that shifted across its surface like oil on water. The second was a pale, almost translucent green, with multiple pairs of eyes that blinked in an unsynchronized rhythm. The third, the smallest, had dark purple skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it wasn't their appearance that made Rachel's heart clench, it was their condition. Their clothes were ragged, their bodies thin and trembling. They had the look of refugees, of runaways, of those desperate enough to risk everything for a chance at survival. "Welcome to Stellar Stop," Rachel heard herself say, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Table for 3. The copper-skinned one stepped forward, its mouth opening and closing several times before sound emerged. "We. No currency," it managed in broken trade standard. "Sorry. We go." Rachel glanced around the empty diner, then at the security camera in the corner that hadn't worked in years. She made a decision that would change everything. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a booth in the corner, partially hidden from the window. "Don't worry about payment." They hesitated, exchanging looks that seemed to communicate volumes. Finally, they moved toward the booth, their movements careful and precise, as if expecting a trap. Rachel grabbed 3 menus, but then thought better of it. These kids needed real food, not choices. She went to the kitchen and hit the bell. "Joey, I need 3 specials. Extra portions." The cook grunted in acknowledgement, used to Rachel's occasional acts of charity. The griddle sizzled to life as she filled 3 glasses with water and carried them to the booth. The aliens watched her every move, their various eyes tracking her with a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm Rachel," she said, setting down the waters. "Drink. Food's coming." They stared at the glasses for a long moment before the copper-skinned one reached out with trembling fingers and took a sip. The others followed suit, and Rachel saw their bodies relax slightly. "Thank you," the copper-skinned one whispered. "I am." It paused, making a series of clicking sounds that Rachel knew she could never reproduce. "In your language, perhaps. Rust." The green one lifted its head. "Mist," it offered quietly. The purple one remained silent, but nodded when Rust said, "This is shadow." Rachel smiled, not pushing for more information. She'd worked this job long enough to know when people, human or otherwise, needed space more than conversation. When Joey rang the bell, she brought over 3 plates piled high with the diner's signature dish: synthetic eggs, vat-grum hash browns, and protein strips that were supposedly bacon-flavored. The way they ate confirmed her suspicions. They were starving, but trying to maintain dignity, taking measured bites even as their hands shook with restraint. Rachel kept their water glasses full and pretended not to notice when Shadow's eyes welled up with what looked like silver tears. That night marked the beginning. They came back 2 days later, then again 3 days after that. Soon it became a pattern, always during the quiet hours, always when Rachel was working. She never asked where they came from or why they were alone. She just fed them, sometimes slipping extra protein bars into their hands as they left. Weeks turned into months. The aliens grew stronger, their clothes less ragged, their eyes less haunted. They still didn't talk much, but sometimes Rust would tell her about the stars, describing constellations she'd never heard of in ways that made her heart ache with their beauty. Mist would occasionally hum melodies that made the water glasses vibrate in strange, lovely patterns. Shadow remained quiet but started leaving intricate drawings on napkins, abstract patterns that seemed to move when Rachel wasn't looking directly at them. She knew it couldn't last forever. The universe had a way of interrupting even the most carefully maintained routines. But on that night, as she watched them eat and felt that familiar warmth in her chest, Rachel couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the dangerous thing, and she'd learned long ago that kindness was its own kind of rebellion against the coldness of space. What she didn't know then was that this simple act of compassion would soon draw her into a conflict that would shake the foundations of everything she thought she understood about the universe and her place in it. The first sign that something had changed came in the form of silence. Rachel noticed it during her regular shift. The usual background chatter of the spaceport district seemed muted, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Even the steady stream of cargo ships overhead had thinned to an occasional whisper. The regulars noticed it too. Old Tommy, a retired asteroid miner who'd been coming to Stellar Stop for longer than Rachel had worked there, kept glancing out the window between bites of his usual meatloaf special. "Something's off," he muttered, his cybernetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. "Too many suits in the district lately." Rachel followed his gaze. He was right. Mixed in with the usual crowd of dock workers and pilots were figures that didn't belong. Men and women in sleek black uniforms that seemed to absorb light. They moved with too much purpose, their eyes scanning constantly, their hands never far from their sides where weapons were undoubtedly concealed. "Enforcement Division," Tommy said quietly, pushing his plate away. "But not local. These are from way up the chain." Rachel's hand tightened around the coffee pot she was holding. She hadn't seen Rust, Mist, and Shadow for 3 days, their longest absence since they'd first started coming to the diner. She told herself not to worry, that they were probably just lying low, but now her concern deepened. "Any idea what they're looking for?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she topped off Tommy's coffee. The old miner's cybernetic eye locked onto her face for a moment too long. "Word is something got stolen from one of the research stations in the outer ring. Something big." He paused, taking a slow sip of coffee. "But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is who they say stole it." Rachel waited, her heart pounding. "Kids," Tommy said. 3 of them. Not human." The coffee pot nearly slipped from Rachel's grasp. She caught it just in time, but a few drops splashed onto the counter. As she wiped them up with trembling hands, her mind raced. It couldn't be them. Not her quiet, grateful visitors who left thank you notes in alien script and drew pictures that made her dream of distant stars. The bell above the door chimed. 2 of the black uniformed figures entered, bringing with them a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The taller one, a woman with silver cybernetic implants tracing delicate patterns across her temples, surveyed the diner with cold efficiency. Her partner, a man whose skin had the gray pallor of someone who'd spent too much time in zero gravity, moved to block the door. "Evening," Rachel said, falling back on years of customer service training. "Can I get you folks anything?" The woman's augmented eyes focused on Rachel with unsettling intensity. "Rachel Winters. Working here 7 years, 4 months, 16 days. That's me," Rachel replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Though I've lost count of the years myself. We need to ask you some questions about certain visitors you've been serving." Tommy stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Think I'll head out," he announced, dropping some credits on the counter. As he passed Rachel, he pressed something into her hand, small, cold, and metallic. "Watch yourself, kid," he muttered. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. The enforcement officers watched him leave, then turned their attention back to Rachel. The woman pulled out a holopad, and with a flick of her wrist, 3 images appeared in the air between them. Rachel's heart stopped. Rust, Mist, and Shadow stared back at her, but not as she knew them. These images showed them in what looked like containment cells, their bodies rigid with fear or defiance. These individuals are wanted for theft, sabotage, and violation of multiple interstellar treaties. The woman said, "Harboring them is a serious offense, one that could result in significant consequences." Rachel thought of the 3 teenagers who'd stumbled into her diner months ago, starving and scared. She thought of their gradual transformation, how they'd slowly begun to trust her, to smile, to hope. Whatever they'd done, whatever they'd taken, she couldn't believe it was without reason. "I serve a lot of people," she said carefully. "Hard to keep track of all the faces." The man by the door made a sound that might have been a laugh. Interesting choice of words, especially since these particular faces aren't exactly easy to forget. The woman leaned forward, her cybernetic implants pulsing with a faint blue light. "Ms. Winters, let me be clear. These aren't innocent refugees. They're dangerous criminals who've stolen something that could destabilize the entire sector. If you know where they are, telling us now would be in everyone's best interest." Rachel felt Tommy's gift in her palm, a small data chip, its edges worn smooth with age. Whatever was on it, he'd thought it important enough to risk passing it to her under the eyes of enforcement officers. She closed her fingers around it. "I wish I could help," she said. "But like I said, I just serve the food. Don't ask questions, don't get involved in anyone's business." "That's how you survive in a place like this." The woman held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But understand this. If we discover you're lying, if you've helped them in any way." She let the threat hang in the air. After they left, Rachel waited until the last customer had gone, then locked the diner's door and flipped the sign to closed. Her hand shook as she inserted Tommy's data chip into her ancient compad. The screen flickered, then filled with text, coordinates, security codes, and a message that made her blood run cold. They weren't stealing. They were escaping. And what they took with them is the key to everything. Keep them safe, Rachel. The fate of more worlds than you can imagine depends on it. As if in response to the message, something scratched at the diner's back door, a familiar pattern that she'd heard countless times over the past months. Her visitors had returned, and with them, the weight of a decision that would change not just her life, but potentially the lives of countless others across the stars. Rachel took a deep breath, deleted the message, and went to open the door. Whatever was coming, she'd made her choice the moment she'd first offered 3 starving alien teenagers a meal without asking questions. Now it was time to face the consequences of that choice, for better or worse. The night stretched out before her, full of possibilities and dangers, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of enforcement vehicles grew steadily closer. Rachel's hands trembled as she ushered Rust, Mist, and Shadow through the diner's back entrance. They looked worse than she'd ever seen them. Their clothes were torn, their skin dulled with exhaustion, and their eyes darted constantly toward the windows. "They're looking for you," she said, locking the door behind them. "Enforcement Division. They showed me your pictures." Rust's copper skin rippled with patterns of distress. "We sorry," they whispered. "Never meant to bring danger to you." "What did you take?" Rachel asked, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "They said it could destabilize the sector." The 3 aliens exchanged glances, conducting one of their silent conversations. Finally, Shadow, who had barely spoken 3 words in all the months Rachel had known them, reached into their tattered clothing and withdrew an object about the size of a poker chip. It looked unremarkable at first, just a disc of dull metal with strange etchings. But as Shadow held it out, it began to pulse with a soft, purple light that seemed to bend the air around it. Rachel felt a strange humming in her teeth and the ancient coffee maker behind the counter sparked and sputtered. "Is Truth Singer," Shadow said, their voice like rustling leaves. "Last one. They would use it to enslave minds, control thoughts, make everyone think same way, feel same way. We couldn't let them," Mist added, their multiple eyes blinking in agitation. "Our people, they already." Their voice cracked, unable to continue. Rachel remembered Tommy's message. They weren't stealing. They were escaping. The implications made her stomach turn. "Your people were test subjects," she guessed. Rust nodded solemnly. "First wave of integration. They say it for peace, for unity. But was control. All independent thought. Gone. Just empty shells following orders." "We were in training program," Mist continued, "meant to learn how to use Truth Singer on other species. But we saw truth, saw what it did to our elders, our families. So we took it and ran." Rachel stared at the device, its purple glow reflecting in the diner's chrome surfaces. "Such a small thing to hold such terrible power. Why bring it to me now?" "Because you showed kindness without asking return," Shadow said. "Because you have strong mind, strong heart. And because," they hesitated, looking at their companions, "because they're coming," Rust finished. "Not just enforcement. Others. Worse ones. Truth Singer calls to them. Only way to keep safe is to separate. 3 pieces, 3 directions." As if to emphasize their words, the device in Shadow's hand began to change. The metal seemed to flow like mercury, splitting into 3 identical discs, each glowing with its own light. Purple, green, and copper. Each piece useless alone, Mist explained. But together, they shuddered. "We trust you with 1 piece. Others we take far away. Make impossible to reunite." Rachel's mind raced. "The enforcement officers, they'll know I have it. They'll come for me." "Yes," Rust admitted. "But they not know how Truth Singer works. Not know its limits. You have advantage." Shadow stepped forward, holding out the purple glowing piece. "Choice is yours. We not force. Already you give more than we deserve." Rachel looked at the 3 aliens. No, the 3 teenagers who had come to her for help all those months ago. They had trusted her then, with their hunger and their fear. Now they were trusting her with something far more precious, the freedom of thought itself. She took the piece. The moment her fingers touched it, the purple light flared brilliantly, then faded to a soft pulse that matched her heartbeat. The humming in her teeth changed to a gentle vibration that felt almost familiar. "How do I use it?" she asked. "It use you," Shadow replied. "We'll show you when time comes. Trust your instincts." Suddenly, Rust's head snapped up. "They close. Must go now." The farewell was brief. There was no time for anything else. Rust pressed something into Rachel's hand. A small data crystal. If things go wrong, this explain everything. Keep safe." Mist touched their forehead to Rachel's in their species' gesture of deep respect. Shadow simply nodded, their dark eyes conveying volumes of unspoken gratitude. Then they were gone, slipping out into the night like ghosts, each carrying their piece of the Truth Singer to opposite ends of the galaxy. Rachel stood alone in her diner, the purple disk warm against her palm, the data crystal cool in her other hand. Outside, she could hear the whine of approaching vehicles. The chrome coffee maker reflected multiple lights, red, blue, and the ominous white of official enforcement vessels. They were surrounding the diner. Rachel took a deep breath and slipped both objects into a hidden pocket she'd sewn into her apron years ago, a precaution from her own troubled past that she'd never thought she'd need. Then she walked to the front door, unlocked it, and flipped the sign back to open. The bell chimed as the door swung wide, admitting a wave of armed officers led by the silver-templated woman from before. Her cybernetic eyes narrowed as she scanned the diner. "Where are they?" she demanded. Inside, she found Rust, Mist, and Shadow waiting. They looked different now, stronger, more determined, their eyes blazing with purpose. "You came back," Rachel gasped. "Had to," Rust said. "Architects following all pieces. Only way to end this is together." Outside, the air crackled with energy as enforcement vessels engaged the Architect ships in desperate combat. The diner's windows rattled with each explosion. "What happens if we unite the pieces?" Rachel asked, pulling out her fragment of the Truth Singer. Shadow stepped forward. "Truth Singer, not what they think. Not tool of control. Is key." "Key to what?" "To choice," Mist said. "To real truth. Show everyone what forced unity really means. Let them decide for themselves." Rachel looked at the 3 fragments of the Truth Singer, now floating in the air between them, pulsing in harmony. "That's why you chose me, isn't it? Not just because I was kind, but because I made a choice. I chose to help you without being forced." The 3 aliens nodded. Above them, the battle intensified. The Architects were breaking through. "Time to choose again," Rust said softly. "Unite pieces, show truth to all. But dangerous. Maybe not survive." Rachel thought of all the choices that had led to this moment. Every free meal given, every question unasked, every small kindness that had seemed so simple at the time. She thought of Voss's vision of enforced harmony, of the Architect's grand design, of all the voices that would be silenced in the name of unity. She reached for her piece of the Truth Singer. The others did the same. The moment the fragments touched, the world exploded into light. Rachel felt her consciousness expand, touching millions of minds across the galaxy. She saw the truth of the Architect's plan. Not unity, but uniformity. The death of diversity, of creativity, of choice itself. And she showed everyone else too. The light faded. The Truth Singer had transformed into pure energy, dispersing through the cosmos. Outside, the Architect ships hung motionless in the sky. In that moment of shared understanding, every being in range had seen the true cost of enforced harmony, and rejected it. One by one, the Architect ships began to retreat. On the ground, enforcement officers lowered their weapons, their certainty shaken by what they'd witnessed. The truth hadn't unified them. It had freed them to choose their own paths. In the diner, Rachel looked at her 3 alien friends, now visible to her in their true form. Not refugees, not thieves, but guardians, chosen by their people to protect the greatest power in the universe. The power of choice. "What now?" she asked. Rust smiled, a real smile this time, full of hope. "Now we rebuild. Different way. Better way. Together, but not same. Unity through choice, not force." Rachel looked around her diner. The cracked vinyl booths, the humming coffee maker, the neon signs still bravely glowing outside. Such a small place to have become the flashpoint for such enormous change. "Well," she said, reaching for her apron, "anyone hungry? First meal of the new era is on the house." The laughter that followed was free, genuine, and completely unforced. The sound of different voices choosing to join together in joy. Outside, the sun began to rise on a galaxy forever changed, not by the enforcement of a single truth, but by the recognition that the greatest truth of all was the right to choose one's own path. And in a small diner at the edge of space, a simple waitress continued doing what she did best, serving food, offering kindness, and proving that sometimes the most powerful choices are also the simplest ones. The end.